Welcome to LTC News. I'm your host, Matt Nelson. As 2020 draws to a close, we're taking a look back at some of our favorite segments. We begin with a story from January about ePropelled, a local manufacturer of small electric motors who moved into the Boot Mills, bringing manufacturing back to the iconic Lowell building.
In the electrification of the planet, which is what's going to happen over the next few years, most people are predicting this. There are three technologies that really matter. Number one is the battery. Number two is the electric motors. And the number three is the power electronics to manage all that. So ePropelled is actually designing and manufacturing of electric motors as well as the power electronics. So I started last year looking at who's got the best patents. And it turns out, in my opinion, that the best patents were from a company in Wales, in UK, where this fella, who happens to be a very nice guy, he's our global CTO now, and he happened to be working on motors for the last 15 odd years and had a company called Electronica. Really liked the fella, and I said, you know what, it might be a good idea for us to actually merge your company into the new formed company, ePropelled, here in Massachusetts. I've done companies at other places, okay? And sometimes you're in the middle of nowhere. And I wanted us to be in an inner city area. Okay, so we looked at 2 or 3 different places, but the main two that we looked at was Lawrence, and then the second place we looked at Lowell. Restaurants and food is very close and it's very nice. And plus the biggest reason was the University of Massachusetts, Lowell. In fact, we hired David last year and he just finished his PhD. And he's worked out really fantastic. And we're hoping that we can actually get more kids out of there. We've actually set up a manufacturing line here for the air motors. By that, I mean drones as well as flying cars. So we have people now coming to us and saying, you are actually a U.S. company manufacturing in Massachusetts, in Lowell. You know, they don't have to go to foreign lands, to actually get this. And we've got really great reception.
This is my best show and tell. So this here basically is a 1 horsepower motor.
Yeah.
Right? This is a half horsepower induction motor. This would replace this in size and weight, but twice the power of that.
Flying cars are the next step for today's drone technology.
It's a lot easier to build a car that's just a little bit above the skyline, if you like. It doesn't have to be at 30,000 feet like a jetliner, but it just has to be above a certain level. Let's assume that it's a taxi. I think this is probably going to be a number of companies I know are working on this stuff, and we're certainly in discussions with them, where you actually in Boston Common have a bunch of taxis. You get in the taxi, it goes up and goes to Central Park in New York in 45 minutes and land. I mean, that's the ideal thing. So I don't think that the first wave of things will be a flying car in your garage or my garage. But certainly there will be, services coming in where it makes it very efficient. In my opinion, I think we're probably about 5 years from having those type of services in place.
Following the murder of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department, calls for racial justice broke out across the country. On July 14th, before the City Council meeting featuring Mayor John Leahy's motion to declare racism a public health crisis in Lowell, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Consortium held a rally at JFK Plaza. For 2 hours, residents and community leaders spoke about the experience and consequences of racism in the city.
Are you guys excited to rally for change? Awesome. I am a proud member of the DEI, which stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, because that's what we're trying to get done. It's all about all of us working together to get things done and recognizing the power of each and every voice.
I'm standing here today representing all my healthcare colleagues at Lowell Community Health Center. I joined Lowell Community Health Center in support of Mayor Leahy's motions 11.11 and 11.12, seeking the eradication of racial disparities in healthcare. I want all of you to join me in eradicating racial disparities. The shadow of racism is impinging on the rights of everyone to seek appropriate and adequate health care when needed.
The history here, right, that every group comes in, they face prejudice and discrimination, and then they rise to some level of political or economic power, except for the black and brown folks. That doesn't happen for us. I wonder why. So let's talk about that. Systemic racism. What does it mean? Do our local leaders even know? I'm asking for real. Do they? Do they really know what it is? Because I highly doubt it. Systemic and institutional racism impacts all of us, okay? In a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist, okay? Angela Davis said that. So it's not just our elected leaders, it's all of our leaders. Every single person who walks into a boardroom, every single person who is an executive director or a CEO, every single person who has some kind of decision-making power in this city has to analyze themselves, has to unpack their whiteness, has to unpack their privilege.
Yo vine aquí en el 92.
She came here to this town back in 1992.
Donde pasé la peor discriminación hacia mi familia en esta ciudad.
To my dismay is where I experienced firsthand the racism that this city had to offer, unfortunately.
En todos los lugares que iba no tenían intérprete, donde yo tenía que pasar mucho trabajo, empezando por la ciudad.
A lot of the offices, obviously, that she entered in order to get things done, she was turned back. She was turned away. Unfortunately, they very, very little interpreters to help her achieve what she wanted for her and her children as well.
I'm Emmanuel Wapo. I'm a rising senior at Lowell High, and I'm actually very tired of what's been going on in our school. Our expectations of the school system are met in the smallest degree in reality. The only thing actually working in the school system is protecting the few at the expense of the many. I am the many, and I'm tired of it, and you should be tired of it as well. I'm always told that it's up to our generation to change the mistakes of the past, yet that is false. If you want to get the intended behavior, moderate and model the best behavior. If you wanted LHS to be a #1 school, you should have acted like a #1 school.
And the bottom line is that racism hurts children in real and fundamental ways. It hurts not just their health, but their chances for a good and successful life. And these disparities are proven to increase their risk of health problems and probability of reduced overall life expectancy.
Lowell is racist. Lowell never knew. Lowell said assimilate. Lowell said I don't see color. Pray that you see me. See my skin in all its sun-kissed glory, and call me the queen that I am. To bring about change, you must not be afraid to take the first step. We will fail when we fail to try. Rosa Parks. Racism is a public health crisis. Lowell Public Schools and Lowell Police Department has failed so many of our families and students. Let's not add this to the failure by deeming the voices of this city are not worthy to be listened to. Be the change. Thanks, y'all.
Coronavirus, of course, has been the most impactful subject of 2020, still affecting every aspect of our lives, even with vaccine distribution on the horizon. As schools began the process of reopening in July, the United Teachers of Lowell staged a large protest in front of City Hall. We'll now hear from several members of the union about their concerns.
We want to have testing done by someone that we and administration from the school department or the city agree to. So it would be a fair testing process to make sure the environment within the building doesn't represent a hazard to either our students or our teachers or paraprofessionals, custodians, or anyone else that works in the buildings.
Buildings are not safe, and the people you see here are the people who live in the building. They're the teachers, they're the custodians, they're the cafeteria workers. They're in the buildings 6 to 8 hours every single day, and they've been doing that for years.
And we're insisting on that because we know the history, the chronic failure of our school system, of our infrastructure, and the lack of investment and maintenance that's caused us so much discomfort over the years. What has been uncomfortable in the past is critical now.
I mean, remote learning was definitely challenging for the teachers as well as the students, and we want to be back in school. Personally, my classroom has no windows, there's no ventilation, so what we want is a third-party assessment of ventilation.
When the teachers and these people tell you that the buildings are safe because the windows don't open, because there's no circulation, no ventilation, they're telling you the truth. The teachers and all these people want to be in the buildings. We want to be with the children. There's no question about that. But what we want it to be safe, not only for the teachers and the staff, but more importantly for the students, because they deserve the very, very best.
But we can't do it. And to just sort of pretend the pandemic isn't a factor doesn't make any sense. The first time, if it ends up the school committee continues to support this, then the hazards faced by students and by our members are going to be at their hands, or on their hands and their responsibility. We're trying to avoid that.
When you hire someone who may have some business with the city prior to this or has some connection or knows somebody, I don't know if that's the case, but there was a whole list of people or organizations that could have been selected and none of them were, and now we have a company. The union was never notified, it was never asked, it was never in any kind of collaboration with the decision of who they chose. That sends a red flag to us.
Why not prove to the parents and to the teachers and the staff that are going in that the buildings are safe? The only conclusion I have is they're reluctant to do it because they don't believe that the results are going to be what they're claiming them to be. So prove it to us. And most are not. 91% of our members supported our position in our survey. Over 80% say they're afraid to go into the buildings with face-to-face education for students. Because of the environmental hazards they've become so well acquainted with, unfortunately, over the years.
Honestly, I have made the decision to keep all 3 of my children home this school year. First and foremost, for their safety, so I know that they're safe. I figure a year is not a long time, and to know that my children and my babies are going to be home and not hospitalized and not in a coffin somewhere, that's what I know, and that's what I'll do for them as a parent. First and foremost is safety.
The coronavirus pandemic also had an impact on this year's election, leading to record-breaking numbers of mail-in and early voting. In our next segment, we'll take a look at it in action.
I've always voted early. I think it's a great thing. No lines. I want to make sure I get my vote in. So important, especially this year. And I don't want another 4 years of what we've been having. So I'm looking forward to a new administration.
Well, I think it's really important that everyone's voice is heard, and I think the more people that can vote early with the pandemic going on is just important to be able to count all the votes in time.
Yeah, it can be a little safer and there's a little more room for everybody, and there's lots of people in our city, so it just makes it easier and safer for everyone to vote.
Early voting here at the Senior Center is going to be open from October 17th to October 30th. We try to have on staff during early voting a poll worker who can either speak Spanish or Khmer to assist voters in the process. Additionally, we also have here set up at our early voting polling location something called the AutoMark machine, which is to assist voters who may have a disability. The device can be inserted through this slot right here, and the screen can be used to mark the ballot for the voter. This machine also has audio recordings of the ballot in English, Spanish, or Khmer. So if a voter would prefer to hear the ballot spoken to them in either English or Spanish or Khmer, they can use these headphones here in the AutoMark machine, and they can listen to the ballot through there. Additionally, our ballots are trilingual, so our ballots are written in English, Spanish, and Khmer. So a voter can read the ballot in that language if they so choose.
Short lines, everyone knew exactly what they were doing, it was efficient. I'm glad we came when we did, it was quick.
We've had quite the turnout so far for in-person early voting. Just to put it in perspective, in the first 3 days of in-person early voting, we more than, in my opinion, tripled the total amount of people who did in-person voting for the state primary in September, and that was a full week of early voting.
This is such an incredibly important year for us to get out the votes, and I didn't want to be stuck in the long lines at the last minute, so I just want to make sure I'm counted like everybody else.
And why is it so important this year?
I have a lot of friends who have said that it's important to vote as if your life depends on it, and their lives depend on it.
So our ballot drop boxes at Lowell City Hall are available for voters to use up until 8 o'clock on Election Day, November 3rd. After 8 o'clock on November 3rd, you can no longer deposit ballots in the ballot drop box. So if you are planning on using it, we recommend you do so as soon as possible.
Para votar.
Es muy importante.
Muy importante
por dar su voto para el cambio del Estado y los demás.
I don't trust the post office to get it there on time. I want to make sure that it gets counted, so.
In November, the City of Lowell released a map of proposed election district lines that would go into effect for 2021's municipal election. To learn more, we spoke with Nancy Cohn of Lowell Alliance and Oren Selstrom, who represented the plaintiffs in the Hewitt et al. Case that brought about the changes to Lowell's election system.
My name is Oren Selstrom. I'm the litigation director of Lawyers Civil Rights. We're a nonprofit civil rights law firm. And we had the honor and privilege of representing the group of Asian and Latino plaintiffs who filed the Voting Rights Act lawsuit that we're going to be discussing today. We filed that suit in 2017 because the all at-large citywide method of electing public officials was diluting the vote of communities of color in a way that was both unfair and made the elected bodies not reflective at all of the rich diversity of Lowell.
The city was one of the few larger municipalities in the Commonwealth that still had at-large voting across the whole city, and there was a thought among the plaintiffs in a lawsuit that this violated the Voting Rights Act because they didn't have an equal opportunity to kind of have their say in city government when they had, when the votes went across the entire city. So there was a lawsuit, and the settlement of that lawsuit was a consent decree in which we all agreed that we would divide the city into 8 districts, which sort of opens up opportunities for people to run for office and to feel more meaningfully connected to their representatives in office, because it's someone in their area of town, not someone in another part of the city that they're not familiar with and have never met. The Voting Rights Act and the U.S. Constitution both say that we need to create opportunities for people to have a meaningful way to vote, and the current system wasn't doing that. So, it's kind of a chicken and egg problem, right? You can say these people didn't come out and vote, but if they didn't feel like their voices were heard and the system didn't create opportunities for them to feel connected, then that's why they're not voting. So you create the opportunities and then they do vote, and then that's good for everybody. We want more citizens to be involved and to feel connected to government and to feel like their voices are heard.
I'm Nancy Cohn from the director of Lowell Alliance, and we are one of several local organizations who worked with Oren and Lawyers for Civil Rights to educate or inform the public about the change in the voting system. We actually started working back when the suit, shortly after the suit was filed. We worked with Oren to hold several informational sessions throughout the city and in different languages, so people would know that this was happening and why it was happening. Through that process, and also a survey in which I believe we got a little over 100 people, created a draft map that was presented to the city's mapping expert, and the result is fairly close. What the city's expert came up with is fairly close to the map that was presented by the Lowell Alliance Coalition.
So in addition to working with Lowell Alliance, we were also working very closely with CMAA, the Cambodian Mutual Assistance Association, and the Latinx Community Center for Empowerment, and other community leaders to get input from Lowell residents about exactly where the district line should be drawn. If you're starting with a blank slate of a map of the city of Lowell, there are a lot of different ways that the district map could be drawn. But we wanted to make sure that it was a way that made sense for Lowell's residents, that kept neighborhoods together where it made sense to do that. If there were different communities that had similar interests, similar issues that they might want to bring to their city councilor in the future, a school committee member, that those communities stayed together and that where those lines were drawn made sense in a way for all of Lowell's residents. This is still a preliminary step. There will be other steps along the way, but certainly this first step, we have been quite pleased to see that it really reflects the hard work and the community input that we saw this summer.
The initial map that we're working on right now will be finalized by hopefully January, and then it'll be immediately revised once we get the 2020 census data, which is currently scheduled for hopefully March or April of 21. Once we have that data, this map will be fine-tuned to reflect the changes from the 2010 census. And then, as is written in the consent decree, it will be updated every census. So every 10 years, it'll be adjusted not by the city, but by an expert, by a professional who does this for a living.
The pandemic has disrupted many lives and livelihoods, causing increased demand for food assistance in Lowell. This urgent need for food is being met by many nonprofit community pantries, agencies, and churches, forming a huge service network operated with hundreds of volunteers throughout the city. The Dwelling House of Hope is one of these pantries, collecting food donations from multiple sources, including the Merrimack Valley Food Bank, which in 2019 distributed 3.75 million pounds of food.
Just in September, our member agencies reported serving 60,000 people, and that's up from 45,000 in August, and it's up 28% from September of 2019. That's a testament to how the lack of resources or the timing of resources is causing people who have never had to ask for help before to go to a food pantry. And we want people watching to know that there's no shame. There shouldn't be any embarrassment if anybody needs help with food. Thanksgiving is a very special season here at the food bank and for people who celebrate this annual tradition. And we gladly accept donations of frozen turkeys. We have seen an extraordinary amount of generous donations of gift cards for supermarkets and frozen turkeys. And our freezer is full of frozen turkeys as we speak. There is a sufficient level of food to satisfy the needs and health concerns of all of our neighbors. The challenge is access. We, for example, here at the food bank, we operate a mobile pantry, and we've been doing this as part of the food bank for 17 years. And we deliver groceries to people that are homebound. They're too frail or ill, most of them are elderly and disabled, to get to a food pantry. We bring them once a month, through volunteers, 30 days worth of food. That helps them maintain their health and use their resources to pay their financial obligations.
Dwelling House of Hope is a food pantry which is located on 125 Mount Hope Street. We serve families, like last month we served like 700 plus families, which is a total of almost 3,000 people. We get our food from, some of the food we get it from Walmart, Trader Joe's, Stop and Shop, Hannaford's, and we also get from Merrimack Valley Food Bank. We open on Saturday from 10 o'clock. And for people who come to pick food for distributing, like Lowell Community Health Center, Vinfen, Active Day, churches, they come on Thursday and they pick the food in bulk to go deliver to their people. On Thanksgiving, like we already started registering people in advance, which we don't usually do. People, they just walk in. But we have already registered people in advance, and United Ways donated 300 gift certificates for Market Basket. And so what we'll do is when people, they come, they're not going to wait very long like they usually do. We will already pack the boxes and bags of food. So those who have already registered in advance, we just look at their number and we give them their package and they leave.
A new historical fantasy novella titled The Factory Witches of Lowell was published in November. The novel is about a group of supernatural young women working in the mills during the Industrial Revolution who form a union and go on strike.
Were you interested in just telling a story about a labor action or worker solidarity, and Lowell presented itself as an outlet for that, considering its history? Or were you specifically looking to do something that married supernatural fiction with mill towns in New England?
I had this thought in my head of this magic system that was based on the relationships between workers, machinery, and their bosses. And I was actually trying to write a modern day urban fantasy that was working with those themes. And I wanted labor organizers in the book. It became very clear to me that the history of Lowell and the life of the mill girls was very well documented. Lowell is actually a place that I could get to, that there was a historic park and I could walk into one of the factories, I could walk into one of the boarding houses and see it for myself. So that made it all really attractive as a place where I could set a story.
Do you feel like this book is in conversation with any of the labor organizing that is going on now, or organizing for, social justice that is going on anywhere now? I'm thinking of, the strike portrayed in this book is led by women, as are so many of the most spectacular examples of labor actions over the past couple of decades.
Absolutely. I don't really think there's much difference between what these characters are dealing with and what so many working class people are dealing with right now. Especially in the middle of a pandemic, when so many people are being told you have to be in this place that is bad for your health. And these girls are working in closed factories, breathing in cotton dust every day. And I think I've been so inspired by, Amazon workers running out of their warehouse saying, no, we're not going to go to work in there right now. We know somebody has a case of COVID. It's not safe. And I think we need more of that.
And that does it for LTC News 2020. We look forward to bringing you more hyper-local stories in a hopefully pandemic-free 2021. I'm your host, Matt Nelson. We'll see you next year. Hold on. Here's one for the credits. Maybe. Someone say banana. It's gone. It was gonna be a sneeze. Ugh.